Be careful when you enter Big Sky Country. You might just encounter some big mysteries. Ghosts and shadow people, two ephemeral phenomena that can strike terror in a person's heart. Are they tricks of the mind or actual entities? Are they benign or do they mean us harm? You decide for yourself as you listen to these 4 reportedly true stories of ghosts and shadow people. I want to say thank you to all my current subscribers, my new subscribers, and all of you listening, perhaps for the first time. Thank you for joining me to listen to these scary stories. If you like these terrifying tales and have not done so already, please hit that subscribe button along with the notification bell so you make sure not to miss a single scare. Now, enjoy. 4 Maria Street by Benson 4535. So I've had a long history with the paranormal. It started very young, and as I grew older, I started hunting for them. I decided to submit the long tale of how I got brought into this craziness. I was born in a small town called Penetanguishene, Ontario, Canada. Now, my dad told me that growing up in our first house, there was a lot of activity that was a little unnerving. I had a friend that my parents could not see. I described her as an older lady named Mary. Now, I would sit in my bedroom and listen to Mary tell me story after story for hours on end. My dad was very worried about this. Eventually, he decided to ask me about Mary. I started telling him about how she looked and what she would tell me, including a story about my dad breaking a statue when he was 9 years old. This caught my dad by surprise. Apparently, said statue was broken at his babysitter's, and as far as he knew, the babysitter had never told my grandma. He asked my grandmother about it, and she looked at him oddly as he told the story, then told him she had never heard of that story. This sent a chill down his spine. So he asked my grandmother what the first name of the babysitter was, as he had always called her Mrs. Desrochers. Her name was Mary Ann. My dad was floored. When he got home, he came into my room where I was talking to Mary. He just watched from the door as I sat there talking to some invisible person about my day and toys and anything else that was in my mind. Eventually, my parents came to see Mary as a positive despite the odd things that would happen. For instance, when it got cold, blankets would inexplicably be wrapped around my sister and myself. Yet the blankets were stored too high for us to reach. When asked, I would tell them about Mary bringing them. Not all of the spirits of that house were good. As children, we were afraid of a separate room in the basement next to the laundry room. It was a barren concrete room. We used to complain of a terrifying man in there who was chained to the wall. As I grew older, I felt it was silly to be afraid of this man. Mary was long gone from my mind, and I would pass through the room with no issues. Until one day, when I was home with the chicken pox, my grandmother was watching me. I was about 8 at the time. I was helping my grandmother with laundry when she had to bring up a basket of clean laundry. I knew how to work the washer and dryer and how to switch the clothes, so I did that while she ran up. I was almost done when I heard something weird from the next room, the barren room. I stopped and listened for it again. A few minutes went by and nothing happened. So I finished and went to turn on the dryer when I heard it again. It sounded like a chain being dropped. I stood in silence as I heard it again, then a metal dragging sound. I then made a very poor decision. I began walking toward the room. As I stepped inside the room, all the sounds had stopped. I saw nothing in the room. I stood there for several minutes just glancing around. Nothing stirred. I turned to leave when standing right there in the doorway was a tall, thin man, dirty and torn clothes draped on him. Around his leg was a long, rusty chain. I was frozen. He walked oddly. I could see the skin over his thin limbs stretch like elastic as he shambled towards me. This is where I fell over and covered up. I let out a blood-curdling screech until I felt hands on me. I started to scramble and fight back until I heard my grandmother's voice. "What is it? What's wrong?" I opened my eyes and realized my grandmother was holding me. My heart was racing and I blurted out the whole story. She just looked at me worryingly and brought me upstairs. We moved a few months later. I never set foot in that basement again. In my teenage years, I did some research and found out that the people who owned our house before had a son with a mental disorder of some sort. They abused and tortured the poor kid and chained him to that basement. His existence was not known until after his parents had passed, and they found him chained in that basement. He had starved to death. The thought of that sends chills through me to this day. How Did I Even? By Master Fang. So I am really scared of the events that took place just last week. To start off with this story, I'm going to say I'm not the best with punctuation, but I will try. So about a week ago, I woke up in the dead of night and saw an orange man. And this man is, and I say man because I don't know what he is, wearing an orange top hat, an orange Day of the Dead type mask, but with like a hole where the mouth of the mask would be, and orange formal wear, but there is no actual body, just the clothing I have described above. And this guy is just walking past the couch. I sleep on the couch because my bed is cluttered with things, and as I see him, I automatically jump up with a gasp, and as I do so, this man whips around and stares at me. So me and him have a stare off while I can see that he was breathing, because I saw the breath as if it were winter. As we stare each other down, he just slowly fades away. This happened for 2 days, and on the third, I'm expecting the usual, but this time, he is nowhere to be seen when I wake up. Minutes pass by, and then I hear it breathing right freaking behind me. So I whip around instantly just to see, you guessed it, nothing. And from then on, at random times, day or night, I will hear breathing directly behind me. Night Shift in a Care Home by BeardedBamboozle. I recently found some Let's Read type channels on YouTube and decided to try and write down an experience I had a few years ago, as it seemed similar to the content being posted. I'm 27 years old, male, live in the UK with my fiance, and currently work as a teaching assistant for teenagers with special educational needs in a school not far from Bradgate Park in Leicestershire. I have worked in a number of schools and children's homes now, and these buildings, especially the children's home, are usually old, renovated houses or halls. This particular story happened in 2013 when I had just started working as a support worker at a care home for teenagers and young adults, 18 to 30 years old, with autism, brain damage, and challenging behavior. The house that I worked in was pretty big. There were 2 living rooms, a large kitchen, a games room, a study, and 5 bedrooms. There was also a huge garden with a summer house and activity home that led on to acres of fields and woodland. I had been working there for about 3 weeks and primarily worked the waking night shift. This shift ran from 10 p.m. until 8 a.m., and it was my duty to make sure all of the residents were settled for the night and to get the cleaning done before the day staff came in to take over. I would usually get all of my jobs done around 1 a.m. and spend the rest of the night listening out for anyone that woke up. I would watch TV, read my university course books, or sometimes just play games on my phone once I finished. The residents usually slept all night. On one particular night, a young man named James, not the actual name for legal reasons, was particularly restless. He was not very big, but he had a lot of strength behind him when he got into one of his bad moods, and the slightest thing could set him off. He once threw a member of the staff through a patio door because she had forgotten to put cold water in his tea before he drank it. He could not form full sentences and would communicate with fairly simple words put together in a way that he understood. For example, he would say something like, "James, make breakfast," when he was ready to make breakfast, or "James, go outside," if he wanted to go outside and play. He was generally well behaved and could be quite funny when he wanted to, but was well known for his temper. At around 11 p.m., James got up and came downstairs to make a drink. I stood in the doorway and watched to make sure he didn't break anything or hurt himself, and he went back upstairs without any real bother. I sat on the top step and kept an eye on his door for maybe 15 minutes or so to make sure he didn't wake any of the other residents. Once he had settled, I went back to my cleaning. The room beneath James's bedroom was a communal living room with board games, a TV, sofa, books, and stuff like that. I was in there dusting and mopping the floor when I heard something heavy drop onto the floor in the room above. I knew James was prone to temper tantrums if he got frustrated, so I went upstairs and knocked on his door. As I reached for the key to open it myself, he opened the door and looked at me. He seemed perfectly calm and his eyes looked almost half shut like he had been asleep. I asked if he was okay, and he said yes and put his thumb up. This was something he did when he was in a good mood and not stressed out, so I left him to it and told him to be careful, thinking he had knocked something over. An hour or so passed, and by now I was in the kitchen cleaning the sink. I heard another bang above me, again like something had been dropped. This time, I realized that the room above the kitchen was currently empty. The house was set up to house 5 residents, but there were only currently 4, and the room above me was the spare, empty room. I immediately went to check it out, but the room was empty. I stood there for a while, and as far as I could tell, everyone was asleep. Due to the nature of their conditions and behaviors, each resident has an alarm fitted to their door that is activated at night, so if anyone leaves their room, a small receiver box that the night staff carry around makes a noise and a light blinks for a few seconds to indicate which door had been opened, numbered 1 through 5. The alarm had not gone off, so I knew that the noise was not from any of the residents. I got back to my cleaning and didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. The following night, I got to work just before 10, and as I entered the hallway, I could tell that something was wrong. James was at the bottom of the stairs, covering his ears and humming loudly, and 3 members of staff were with him. After a few minutes, he was escorted to the sitting room, and the house manager gave me a rundown of what had been going on. For the last 4 hours, James had been quite agitated and kept repeating the phrase, "Sarah, little girl," when asked what was wrong. This was something we had never experienced with him before, and the general conclusion was that he had seen something on TV or in a movie that stuck in his head and made him repeat this phrase. Once James had settled in bed, the night staff left, and the other member of staff that was sleeping in went up to the staff bedroom. I got on with my tasks and, as usual, finished around 1 a.m. Soon after this, I went upstairs to do a quick check on all the residents, but as I got on the first floor landing, I noticed the light had been turned off. There were 2 small corridors leading to the bedrooms on the left and right-hand sides of the staircase. James's room was on the left, and the light switch was just outside his room. I turned the corner to flick the switch, and there, in the darkness, in complete silence, was James. He stood in the corner, completely naked, with his eyes as wide as he could possibly hold them. I'm a big guy, 6'3" and weigh about 220 pounds, but at that moment, I was really creeped out. I spoke calmly to James and asked what was going on, and for a while, he said nothing at all. Then, as I turned the light back on, he let out an ear-piercing scream and started slapping himself around the face. The sleep-in staff woke up at this point and helped me to calm the situation and get James back into bed, before reassuring the other residents that everything was fine. After that night, I had 4 days off. My shift pattern was 7 days on, 2 days off, followed by 8 days on and 4 days off. And I was relieved that this incident had happened just as my time off began. I got back to work the following week and was told that the situation with James talking about the little girl had got a lot worse. He would spend hours staring out of the window that overlooked the garden saying, "Little girl, where are you, little girl?" And no one knew where he had heard the phrase. That night, around 3 a.m., the alarm went off to say that the door to room 5, the spare room, had been opened. Now, this instantly seemed a bit weird, as the door to the spare room is always kept locked because it was being used for storage at the time. I went up to investigate and found James standing in the room in the dark. He didn't seem to notice me entering and was just standing there whispering, "Where are you?" over and over again. I gently touched his shoulder and said something like, "Come on, mate, let's get you back to bed, it's late." James turned around and started heading back to his room, and for a second I was relieved. But then, as I locked the door to the spare room, he screamed, "Oh no!" and started pummeling the door with both fists. As he did this, the alarm went off to indicate that the front door had been opened. The only people with a key to the front door were myself, as the night wake staff, and the house manager. The door has 4 locks on it, 2 that require a key and 2 that require electronic ID cards. It was now 3:25 a.m., and the manager never came in before 8 a.m., so I presumed there must have been some kind of mistake and continued to defuse the situation with James. He finally calmed down and went back into his room, so I went downstairs to check the front door. To my surprise, it was wide open. I shut it immediately and started checking every room in the house in case someone had got in. I then checked on each of the residents to make sure they were all still in the house. Everything was fine. The next night, everything was calm until around 2 a.m. when one of the other residents, Connor, got up and said that someone was tapping on his window. I guess that he must have just been dreaming, as his window was on the 3rd floor of the house and was at least 25 feet from the ground. I went back up to his room with him to reassure him and checked his window. Sure enough, it was shut, and the security lock that prevents it from opening wide enough for someone to fit through, it was still sealed. As he got back in bed, I heard footsteps on the stairs outside of his room. He froze for a second and looked at me with an expression of pure panic on his face. I opened the door to see who it was, but no one was there. He was clearly scared by this and said, "Is he back?" My blood ran cold and I asked, "Is who back? What do you mean?" Connor looked over my shoulder and then sank down into his bed, pulling the duvet up to his mouth. I turned around to see what he was looking at, but there was still no one there. "Tell him to go away," Connor said in a hushed, scared voice. I tried to reassure him that there was no one there and left his bedside lamp on before leaving the room. I went downstairs and sat outside on the patio with a cup of coffee. It was the middle of January and around -2 outside, but it felt like I had to get out of the house for a while. After about 40 minutes, I went back inside and washed my cup in the sink, dried it, and put it back in the cupboard. Beneath the cupboard was a locked, secured drawer where all of the sharp knives are kept until needed. The drawer was open slightly. This was obviously a major issue, as none of the residents were allowed access to the knife drawer without supervision. I counted the knives and realized that there was one missing, so I woke the sleep-in staff, told her the situation, and we began a search. Nearly 2 hours later, we still hadn't found this missing knife, so decided to just keep our guard up and make sure none of the residents were hiding it. 2 hours later, at 5:30 a.m., the alarm sounded. It was the door to the spare room again. I went up to check it out and found that the door was locked. How could the alarm have been activated by the door opening if the door was still locked? I went inside and turned the light on. To this day, I still have no explanation for what I found, and I often think about this incident. The bed had been pushed from its usual place and was against the wall, and the wardrobe doors were open. There were screws and nails all over the floor, but nothing was broken. But the most disturbing part? In the middle of the room, there was a children's doll, a gold bracelet, and the missing knife from the kitchen. The doll was an old-style baby doll. My guess was that it was made in the 50s from the style of clothes and the overall look of the doll. The bracelet was simple but old-looking. I left everything as it was and reported it to the manager as soon as she arrived. No one ever claimed the bracelet belonged to them, and it was taken to a charity shop soon after, along with the doll. After the doll and bracelet were removed from the house, James seemed to calm down and never mentioned a little girl or stood around in the dark again. I still don't have an explanation for everything that happened, and sometimes think that it was just a combination of strange behavior from a young autistic guy and the fact that the house was old. But on the other hand, a lot of stuff happened that I can't explain logically. My only regret now is that the doll and bracelet are gone and can't be examined or identified. Maybe it was paranormal. Who knows? But now, I work day shifts and do not plan on working night shifts again anytime soon. Creepy Shadow People by Nathanial Olive. Well, I live in Canada, in Edmonton, Alberta, and I have had some freaky experiences in my home. Well, my whole family has. Examples of things that go on in my house are stuff like sleep paralysis, and things nowhere close to anyone being moved in front of us. Also a whole bunch of creepy noises and things going bump in the night. My house is a very old trailer home on the outskirts of the city, and I'll give you the rundown about my family. My mom, a very religious woman, is a believer in the supernatural and a horror movie fanatic, I guess. My younger brother, who is 16 years old, is a very avid soccer player and plays on Victoria, both the men's team and the U18 team. This will tie into the story, so don't worry. About 2 months ago, in April, I was home alone gaming in my room playing some CSGO with a mate. Well, I had played for about 2 hours and I was kind of sick of playing CSGO, and I decided to turn my PC off and watch Netflix on my phone. Just as I started watching a new show I found on Netflix, I heard some noises from the kitchen. For example, such as the cabinets were opening and closing, plus the dishes in the sink were being moved. This isn't unusual, since when my mom gets home after my brother's soccer games and practices, she puts some of the dishes from the living room into the dishwasher and puts the clean dishes into the cabinets. Well, without thinking about how long my mom was gone for, which was a relatively short time, and she wouldn't have been home for another hour or two, I left my room to see something in my hallway just standing outside of the kitchen, which connects to the hallway through a short corridor. As I focus on the thing at the end of the hall, I thought it might be my brother. I then realize it doesn't have a shadow on the wall behind it, which was weird. This piqued my curiosity, and I decided to take a harder look at the thing. My heart goes into my throat as I realize it's like a shadow, like a silhouette made of wispy black crap. As I stand just outside my room, I think it shocked me so bad I didn't even know what to do. Without even thinking about it, I open my room door and slam it behind me, fearing for my life. All I could think of doing was calling my mom and telling her what I just saw. She tells me to get the hell out, and I did. I open up my window, which doesn't have a screen, and hop out of it and book it to my friend's house. He lives about 2 houses down from mine, and when I got there, I tell my friend what happened. To my horror, he starts to go pale and begins freaking out, and tells me about one of the times he was at my house for gaming night, and we planned on him staying the night, which he didn't because of this. He began by telling me his story. He was going to go to bed on the living room couch, and out of the corner of his eye, he said he saw something in the kitchen that looked like a figure made out of black mist. He didn't tell me this because he didn't want to scare me, and he told me he was going to sleep in his own bed that night. I am still living in that house, and sometimes I still feel as if something is watching me. I hope that I don't meet that thing again. Thanks again for joining me for the 4 scary tales of ghosts and shadow people. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to know when the latest horror is available. Want to hear your true or fictional scary story narrated by me on this channel? Send your story to bigskymysteries@gmail.com or check the description below for more details. Remember to check those corners for insubstantial shapes and black mists. We never know when we might get a visit from something paranormal. I'll see you in your nightmares. Good night.